The night was dark, and there was an ominous silence in the gorge. John ran between the rocks and felt danger behind him. The menacing demons of the Fortress of Darkness were very close. The guards were ordered to kill the fugitive at any cost. For the first time in several decades, someone dared to leave the fortress. The daredevil had to be punished. The main character realized that he would not be able to escape the pursuit and decided to accept the fight. The killers surrounded their victim from all sides, hoping for an easy victory. There were a lot of thugs. The elder of the Heavenly Alliance of demons and murderers knew who he was sending his loyal servants against. Swords and axes flashed everywhere. John fought with all his might, knowing that his long-awaited freedom was at stake. The demons did not know where the fugitive got his enormous energy from. He seemed to be hovering above their heads, killing one after another. The main character realized that he couldn't handle hundreds of fighters with a sword. He had to hit them all at once. This could only be done with a technique that took him several months to learn, a beam of continuous fire. The fighter watched from a bird's eye view as his enemies fell dead, defeated by magical power. Most of the attackers were neutralized. The slain demons were replaced by new forces. The fugitive gathered all his energy. His sword flew like a bird, striking the enemy. The forces were again unequal. The next 100 guards were very close. They could only be stopped by a wall of fiery light, which the main character took advantage of. The victory came at a heavy price. John was seriously wounded and quickly tried to leave the battlefield, realizing that this was a temporary respite. Every step became more and more difficult. The main character was exhausted, but he had to move on. There was little time left until the secret place where one could hide and recuperate. A small hut with supplies of food and water had been prepared long ago and was waiting for the owner. No one knew about this corner. A shadow flashed over the fugitive's head. There was another fight ahead. This time there was only one opponent, but John immediately realized that this was a strong opponent, probably from the top echelon of security. The guess was correct. In front of the main character stood a fighter with a level of protection from magic. Gathering his remaining internal energy, the fugitive struck first. The demon didn't have time to block and was struck down on the spot, but new movement was felt behind him. Demon Queen Gloria watched the fight from the sidelines. The beauty was sweet and radiated streams of energy. But John knew that behind the angelic face lurked the most insidious and evil witch. The main character prepared his sword. He knew that he couldn't relax. Gloria did not hide her intentions. She promised her old friend help in exchange for teaching the magical technique of the Karo monk fighters. The teaching combined several techniques, including magic and power techniques that had no equal before. John managed to master several basic techniques. The lady promised to hide the fugitive and heal his wounds. The Demon Queen knew that none of the freedom lovers could realize their dream, because a deadly worm was implanted into the body of everyone who became a combat weapon of the Alliance's Fortress of Darkness, destroying everyone who expressed thoughts of escape or wanted to do so. John tried to buy time. He understood that the fight was inevitable. The fugitive did not reveal the secret that the parasite inside him had long been destroyed. The witch tried to seduce her rival, but the main character had long known all her tricks. The fight was fierce. The energy of light and darkness came together. Lack of strength after unequal battles and injuries did not give a chance for success. The fighter held out until the end. He was the best killer in the fortress, so numerous demon troops were sent after him. But death turned out to be stronger. The hands of the Queen of Monsters flashed with incredible speed and wounded instantly. Another shadow flashed nearby. The last thing the main character saw was the elder's sword cutting off his limbs. John was left without legs and arms. The fugitive's thoughts were about an unfulfilled dream. He just wanted to live in an ordinary village, admire the flowers and enjoy the sunsets. His silent request to start this life anew flew out of his body along with his soul. Finally, the witch cut off the head of the rebellious fighter. There was silence. Only the singing of birds disturbed the peace. The young man lay on the bed in a small, cozy house in a small village with his eyes closed and barely breathing. Events, battles, someone's faces flashed through my head. 2 young fighters sat near a mountain of corpses and talked. One dreamed of green grass and wild flowers, freedom without murder and violence. The second guy asked to take him with him to an unknown country. Suddenly, the first young man fell down dead, blood flowing from his mouth. A friend, and it was young John, tried to save his partner. But the commander of the guard appeared and warned that the death worm kills everyone who says the word freedom. The unconscious young man screamed in horror and came to his senses. Looking around, the main character saw a small room with bright windows. not understanding where he was. A girl entered the house with a tray in her hands. The young man grabbed a thin object and put it to the throat of the frightened maid, trying to find out who sent her and for what purpose. The reflection in the mirror showed a young, thin guy with a frightened look and decrepit skin on his body. John could not believe his eyes. Two men entered the house. It was clear from their clothes that one of them was a doctor. He began to examine the main character and left infusions for complete recovery, which had to be taken daily. The older man was in charge and carefully watched the guy. That same day, the healer reported to his master, the fourth heir to the throne, Ray, and the disciple of the ruler, about the condition of the young man, who turned out to be the third in status, saying that he had completely lost his strength after a 3-month coma, and the herbs left behind were supposed to kill the weakened body. At the same time, the chief guard of the state, Jackson, spoke to the supreme ruler, Sullivan, about the condition of the third heir to the throne, noting the presence of weak muscles and memory lapses. A conversation between two unfamiliar men in the courtyard of a neighboring house did not help the main character clarify the situation. John used his old method of covert control and watched those passing by, listening to their conversations. The main character realized that a reincarnation had occurred. He had been given a second life in a new body in an unknown place, and he had to figure everything out. The first thing he needed to do was fix his thin, saggy body, so John began recovery sessions. Energy replenishment magic has helped the old fighter more than once after grueling battles. The healers visited the young master almost daily, amazed at his rapid recovery. There was a lively conversation going on in one of the houses. The fourth gentleman did not understand why his rival, who suddenly came out of a coma, was gaining strength despite taking decoctions of special herbs. John trained daily, and his muscle elasticity and reflexes gradually returned. The training was not in vain. The young man felt in fighting shape again. One morning, the young man heard indignant speeches behind the door, and a stranger entered the house. The little maid was holding her cheek. There were tears on her face. A girl named Stephanie, in the presence of her guards who prevented John from escaping, demanded that he sign the contract. The young gentleman promised to listen to the beauty and asked her to leave for a while, citing a change of clothes, while trying to find out from young Emily who his guest was. Upon returning, the protagonist listened to the complaints of Ray's younger sister. The contract stated that the girl was caring for and treating the third gentleman and demanded a large sum of money for this. John agreed to sign the document under certain conditions. The protagonist told Stephanie that he had to report the situation to the overlord and called the guard. The frightened girl had no choice but to destroy the agreement with her own hands. She understood that the ruler would not approve of her secret actions and would punish the entire family. Jackson reported to his master about the third's request to visit the sovereign. The examination was completed, and the doctor noted the young man's complete recovery. John was getting used to his new body, but he couldn't understand why his second life had once again brought him into contact with demons, whose supreme ruler was the mysterious Sullivan. One fine day, permission to accept was received, and John set out on his journey. The meeting was arranged at the Temple of Justice, located on the edge of the highest cliff. It seemed as if the endless steps led straight to the sky. Shadows of guards flickered from all sides. Finally, the climb was completed. The chief guard and his escort remained to wait outside. The massive door with the symbols of power swung open, and John walked inside. The main character was greeted by a blooming meadow. The sun was shining brightly. Roe deer and hares were running in the distance. It was a picture from his old dream. The path led straight to a small temple standing alone. The demon lord was already waiting for the guest. John noted that his legs seemed to carry him forward on their own. Jackson stood at the entrance and thought. Only 2 people had entered through this door. One remained there forever. The young man was the third visitor. What fate awaited him? No one knew. The protagonist respectfully greeted his master. Sullivan was considerably taller than everyone else and looked tired. The men drank tea and began to talk. The Supreme Commander inquired about the reason for the meeting, but under his menacing gaze, the young man became confused and could not utter a word. Many thoughts flashed through the protagonist's head, and he asked for permission to go out into nature, at least temporarily. The demon lord promised to inform him of his decision later. The first guard, standing at the gloomy door of the Temple of Justice, was surprised to see the third gentleman coming out. The lord was deep in thought. Something about the young man made him wary. He had changed a lot after a long coma. The only witness to the thoughts out loud was a poisonous snake sitting in a cage, which had been captured because of its resemblance to a dragon. The young man's request was granted. He was sent to a bamboo forest. It was just a shock, not at all like nature and freedom. As a guard and servant, John was assigned the chief servant of the judge's detachment, Bob, who had repeatedly been to this dangerous place on missions. For 2 days, the young man sat among dense thickets of thick bamboo. Sunlight practically did not penetrate through the huge trees. Realizing that only he himself could get out of the forest, the main character began to train his ability to restore strength. The sessions were successful. The darkened hair indicated that the energy level had been returned to the original level, which was before the coma. It was necessary to continue the sessions. After a few days, John could already sense the enemy at a distance, see and hear at the level of the most sensitive animals. The young man sent his bodyguard to the library. He ordered to bring him textbooks with magical techniques and spells. Bob was surprised. The third gentleman should have known them since childhood. The guard came to the chief guard for help. The guy's request intrigued both of them. Jackson allowed them to take books with the simplest teachings. Bob received the coveted key and went to the repository of knowledge. The protagonist was horrified by the number of volumes and began to study, sending a bodyguard for protective equipment, since there were no weapons in the house. In the evening, having decided to take a break from his textbooks, John went out into the yard and heard strange, loud sounds. A huge chicken with 3 heads, 6 legs and wings 2 meters long each was flying toward him. Since there was nothing at hand, the young man had to fight back with bamboo stakes from the fence. It was very difficult to break through the feather shield. The monster did not give up. Hearing the sounds of a struggle and the smell of blood, a guard returning from a mission rushed to help. The third gentleman dealt with the huge bird on his own and demanded an explanation from Bob. The bodyguard had been to the bamboo forest several times. Not all of those sent to this house survived. The fence built in 3 rows as a defense did not protect from the attacks of terrible monsters in animal form. There were several valuable plants in the forest, from which medicines and decoctions were made for all diseases and to restore the body. So once a year, a detachment came here to collect the potion. John took up the books with renewed vigor. He wanted to defeat the monsters and get out of the forest prison. It was impossible to study all the magic. So the main character decided to combine both teachings, including all the previous accumulated experience of combat techniques. The energy flared up with great force. The experiment was a success. In the morning, the main character went into the forest to test his new abilities. The monsters didn't keep us waiting. A pack of shaggy werewolves attacked the stranger. The young man managed to defeat the demons. It was time to return home. The chief guard was aware of every step of the third master and constantly reported on his life in exile to his master. John did not have time to reach a safe place. A large, scary beast with fangs and horns appeared ahead. Bob ran to help his owner but did not make it in time. The collision was strong. The main character flew back and hit the ground. His right arm was broken. The beast, a cross between a horse and a tiger, advanced on the youth, who had lost the ability to fight back with his sword. The bodyguard distracted the monster with a loud scream and began to run away from the house. The monster chased after Bob, the distance between them decreasing. The experienced guard calculated correctly, and the animal fell into a camouflaged pit with sharp bamboo stakes. The man ran towards the master before the next demon appeared. Several days passed. The hand healed almost immediately. The power of the secret forest was amazing. The body recovered and grew stronger on its own. During another trip to the forest, John killed an animal. The meat should have been enough for many days. Classes on working with internal energy continued regularly. Both young men noticed that their muscles had increased several times. John explained to his partner that within 2 months, they had to find the heart of the forest and get out of the thicket so that they wouldn't be torn to pieces. In the very center, there was supposed to be a bamboo plant that had special powers. It had to be cleaned and the juice drunk to get the next level of energy. During his forays into the forest, the young man collected rare herbs to prepare a potion. Bob said that only here can you find a plant that relaxes the body after an intense fight and blocks part of the brain. John realized that the decoction that the doctor prescribed for him, in his condition, was not supposed to restore, but to kill. Therefore, they wanted to get rid of him. While the main character was fighting in the bamboo forest, the fourth master was questioning his servant and coming up with more plans to plot against his main competitor. The plan was ready. The support of influential people was needed. The day of the final exit into the forest arrived. Bob tried to dissuade the master, but there was no time to waste. The bodyguard volunteered to accompany John, who allowed them to go together, only to the border of the dangerous center. It was necessary to move through the grove quickly and unnoticed. The partners reached a strange cemetery of animal monsters. The smell was terrible. Suddenly a breeze appeared and the protagonist ordered the bodyguard to stay. The flow of magical wind grew stronger, making it increasingly difficult to walk. John could barely stand on his feet, but he tried to move forward. To turn off the influence of magic and apply additional forces, a pre-prepared potion came in handy. The main character drank a miraculous potion. The gusts of wind disappeared, and the young man walked on, moving in the form of a silent phantom, a skill that came in handy from his past life. The unfortunate phantom tripped over a stone and fell to the ground. John didn't expect this. He knelt down and looked around. The main character's attention was drawn to a small animal curled up and peacefully snoring. The desire to pet the fox was great, but the young man decided to do it on the way back. The treasured magic bamboo was nearby. The energy of the trees charged everything around. Seeing a small sprout, John decided to use it as a source of power. The roots were firmly seated in the ground and did not want to give in. Unfortunately, there was no magic elixir in the bamboo embryo. The power was only in adult plants. The tree needed to be cut down, but the sword only scratched the bark. It was necessary to use the force of a cutting blow, after which the bamboo collapsed as if it had been cut. John looked at the thick trunk in confusion, and suddenly an orange baby quietly appeared next to him. The main character remembered the warning of his guard that in a dangerous forest, even the smallest animal could turn out to be a terrible monster. But the little fox's eyes were so big and kind that his hand automatically reached out to stroke the fluffy little thing. The little animal bit John's fingers with its sharp teeth. Bob, who came up, was surprised how the gentleman was able to cut down a thick tree. It was impossible to carry the huge trunk, so John decided to clean it on the spot. Before the partners had time to drink the coveted juice, heartbreaking sounds were heard. From all sides, beast demons were attacking, their numbers increasing with each passing minute. The main character picked up the red-haired baby from the ground and threw him to his bodyguard, ordering him to run for protection into the house. No one knew that the great demon lord might be keeping a close eye on the third contender. Sullivan, thousands of miles from the bamboo thickets, knew every move of one of the heirs to the throne. The little fox's eyes watched John until he disappeared from sight. These were the eyes of a ruler assessing the actions of one of his future successors. The monsters attacked from all sides. Their numbers did not decrease. John was strong and merciless. The bamboo juice was already starting to work. To win, the main character had to use all the studied magical teachings. The previous techniques also came in handy. The wall of fiery light helped its owner more than once. There was not a single living animal left around, and John went to look for the way to the protective house. He did not remember the road at all. For a moment, there was a suspicious silence, and the protagonist's heightened sense of smell told him that there was danger behind him. The giant python with a split body attacked first, but the young man was ready to attack. The snake turned out to be faster and wrapped its powerful long body around the protagonist's arms like a rope. The steel sword melted in its mouth like plasticine. John saw a poisonous tooth and a long tongue before his eyes, which a second later were replaced by the tip of a blade. The faithful bodyguard could not wait for his partner, and without following the order, he went to look for him. His appearance was very timely. The monster was dead. Bob helped his new friend up. It was time to continue the battle. The demons in animal skin became active again and surrounded the fighters. The battle was unequal. The number of monsters did not decrease, and there was no help to be expected from anywhere. The wall of fiery light that saved John from the fortress guards in his past life once again helped destroy the approaching monsters. The main character's strength was running out. The bodyguard tried to support him. The young people had no chance to escape. The demons, ready to rush and tear the warriors to pieces, suddenly froze. The fox stood before his saviors and seemed to hypnotize the enemies. A flash of lightning illuminated the heart of the terrible bamboo forest. John woke up with something wet on his face and saw a red-haired baby licking his cheek, an unharmed bodyguard lying on the grass nearby. The sun was shining and birds were singing. All the predators were gone. The animal's big eyes looked devotedly at the main character. The capital of ancient Balaban was preparing for the annual holiday and the meeting of guests from all over the empire and neighboring countries. The great demon lord's main temple was visited by family members and event organizers. Final preparations were underway. Sullivan listened to reports and gave instructions. Jackson was the master's main assistant. He prepared the plan and waited for further instructions. The first lord and heir to the throne was away. The ruler greeted the second and praised him for his success in mastering magical teachings. Greg thanked the teacher and promised to continue his studies. Next was Ray, standing with all the family members present. He was instructed to learn the theory of magic. Fifth, Kate also received praise from the Overlord for her success in combat skills, despite being a girl. Little Roxy was sixth, and was given a lot of flack for her poor health and lack of interest in training. The girl was scared and promised to improve. John appeared at the gate and quickly walked to the center of the hall, greeting his master. Sullivan had not seen the main character for several months, and noted how he had matured and glowed with powerful energy. The young man received special praise. The ruler valued strong spirit and fighting skills in everyone. The head of the family invited the third contender to follow him, letting the others go to prepare for the celebration. In the central square, Jackson met the Master of Education. Patricia was responsible for finances in the empire and was puzzled by the festive expenses. Those close to him discussed the appearance of a third student who looked great, although he had recently been rumored to be in a long coma. The gossip irritated Ray, and he prepared the next plan to destroy his rival. Sullivan and John went down to the lake, where no one could disturb their privacy in the gazebo on the water. The great demon lord expressed his admiration for the new level that the young man had reached in the bamboo forest, and the protagonist was surprised that the lord was able to know about his skill. As a reward, John received a decanter with the divine elixir of heavenly powers, which was considered a drink of the higher ones, and permission to return home. The tired travelers set off on their return journey. Bob was delighted when he saw the gift. He had only heard about its existence and had never tried it. The main character approached his home after 9 months of absence and realized that he missed it. A fox cub met the owner at the threshold. John entered the courtyard with the animal in his arms. As he approached the door, the young man sensed the black force that smelled like his competitor and became wary. The faithful servant greeted her master with tears of joy and ran to prepare dinner and water for washing. For the first time in many months, the main character could relax. John lay there and remembered the look Ray had given him when he saw him in the main temple. It was a flash of hatred and rage. It was already night. The house was quiet. There was no need to wait for monsters to attack, and one could rest peacefully. The fourth gentleman was also awake, discussing the news with his faithful servant. The doctor was surprised why his master had called the killers away from the yard, because everything was ready for the assassination. Ray could not explain the reason. Seeing John during the day, he realized that he had changed a lot and decided to postpone the murder. Bob, who came to dinner, could not believe that such a quantity of delicious food belonged to them. There were also enough drinks, and the company sat down at the table. Emily was ordered to sit at the table and eat with everyone else. The partners started talking. John was interested in the supreme structure of the empire and the opportunity to meet with influential people. In his past life, he was a loner, and now he wanted to have support behind him. The loyal bodyguard noted only 2 persons of the state who had access to all connections. The general of strategy, whom it was impossible to see, he was always busy, and the master of education. Ray also remembered Patricia, who also wanted to get help from a representative of the highest authority. The servant was supposed to invite the noble lady to dinner. It was early morning. Emily was surprised that her master was already on his feet and actively training. She noted how matured he had become. Bob brought his friend a sword as a gift to replace the one damaged by the terrible snake. The weapon was made of excellent steel and looked impressive. The Magister accepted Ray's invitation. She was interested in what the young master would offer her. She warned that given her status, she maintains neutrality and does not participate in the showdown between the master's students. But the fourth knew the guest's weak side. Patricia was surprised by the master's knowledge of her personal affairs and was forced to agree. The young man asked for help in the daily transmission of information from the third student's maid about all his words and plans. But the conclusion of the agreement was prevented by an unexpected stranger. John, with a fox cub on his shoulder and a jug of wine, easily passed through the guards and greeted those present. The protagonist offered help to the head of education. He realized that the noble lady had a sick loved one, and the rare item that the fourth contender promised her was very necessary for his treatment, but the healing properties of the potion were greatly exaggerated. John invited the master to his house to continue the dinner. Ray was indignant and cursed his enemy. Patricia and the main character left the restaurant. The young man refused any payment and wrote down the schemes of decoctions and physical exercises with which he recovered from a long coma caused by a complete loss of energy. Now he knew who had sent him into this state. The owner warned Emily that he would be late, and hearing a knock at the gate, the maid happily ran to open the doors. Ray's doctor stood on the threshold, taking advantage of the gentleman's absence. The criminals decided to independently organize the receipt of information, since the master refused to fulfill the fourth's request for surveillance. The servant grabbed the girl and carried her into the barn. He showed the child a beetle that eats the body from the inside if the antidote is not taken in time, and the person dies in terrible agony. The villain forced an insect into Emily's mouth and ordered her to report on her master daily, promising to give her medicine in return. Several weeks passed and Patricia visited John. She was pleased with the results. The rehabilitation course began successfully. The socialite offered her help to the savior. The protagonist knew about the integrity and intelligence of the master of education. She kept records of all financial matters of the empire's activities, as well as the relationships of representatives of different services and departments. The grateful lady passed on her manuscripts to her friends. The young man sat down to study the volumes and was very surprised. There was a lot of previously unknown information. Having learned that there is a special squad of fighters who do not obey anyone, and having told the maid that he will be absent for several days, the protagonist went to the meeting. The guard warned his chief that a third gentleman had come in, and not finding his friend, he went alone to the camp of the outlaws. The Boer gang of killers did not belong to any clan and acted only on the orders of their commander, the strong and fearless Kate, who lost her left eye in one of the battles. There was no one equal to her even among men. One evening the fighters went into a tavern to celebrate another victory. An unknown young man was sitting at a table in the hall. The main character, and it was he, offered to negotiate with the commander, citing the available information, and accused Kate of collusion with the fourth gentleman, for which a large bribe was received. John offered to surrender to justice, but the girl denied everything. The militants were seated at the neighboring tables. The commander got tired of the intrusive gentleman, and she decided to end the conflict by force. The energy of a powerful blow surrounded her body like a wall. The main character did not expect the attack and flew back to the wall. The boss was supported by the entire squad. They were confident of her quick victory. Standing up, John didn't keep us waiting and responded with a beam of lightning. Kate was carried away several meters. The walls of the tavern collapsed, tables and chairs flew to the sides. The fight continued. The commander almost killed the fox cub who suddenly appeared on the battle line, completely enraging the young man. Bob heard the sounds of struggle and rushed to help his partner. The head of the guards, who had seen a lot, knew about the invincibility of the Boer and his boss. But the picture that opened before his eyes shocked him. John stood there unharmed. The battle of magic and energy flows continued. The main character repeatedly suggested giving up, but the girl did not lose hope of victory. The advantage was on the side of the master. The squad leader used her main weapon of magic, Blue Wave, but the enemy held out. John realized that the desperate girl would fight to the end and got angry. It was necessary to end the fight. The main character decided to increase the power. The dragon's flight finally defeated Kate. The team of thugs looked at their commander with sympathy. The wounded girl lay on the stones and understood that her death was very close. I remembered my distant childhood, when the girl was sent to a detachment to study martial arts in order to protect herself. The child was growing up. Kate had already learned a lot. She lived one day at a time, realizing that she could be killed the same way she killed others. Strength and courage helped the brave and courageous girl defeat the squad leader and take his place. Since then, she has steadfastly defended her subordinates. Deciding that she wasn't ready to die yet, the militant boss grabbed her favorite weapon, a loaded sawsword that always saved her in difficult times. Streams of energy rushed like a whirlwind towards the calmly standing John. The hand of the steel wall stopped the squall. The exhausted leader of the killers could barely stand on her feet. The main character received only minor burns on his hands. The girl admitted defeat, but tried to remain proud and independent. John tried to finish off the enemy, but her gaze was irresistible. Defeated, Kate still tried to defend herself and stand up for her squad. The young man realized that he couldn't kill, and his hands dropped of their own accord. The third gentleman gave money to the owner of the tavern to restore the destroyed premises. John ordered that this sum not be taken from the poor merchant and went home. The commander and his detachment remained at the broken walls. The Trinity, including the animal and Bob, were hurrying to a late dinner. The girl looked after her conqueror. It was the first time she had met a warrior with such inner strength and honesty. It was the middle of the night, but candles were burning in Ray's house. The fourth gentleman already knew about the meeting between his enemy and the detachment commander. The young man recalled a deal for which he had given Kate a significant amount of money and which no one could have known about. Ray realized that Patricia could be John's only source of information, The incense sticks relaxed the villain's body and thoughts, and another plan for revenge matured in his head. The fourth disciple was strong in poisons, so he decided to paralyze the enemy with poison vapors, the death from which would be long and painful. This is why the health of the baby of the sixth generation of heirs was declining. The child was constantly exposed to toxic substances emanating from the sticks. The deadly weapon was ready. It was necessary to place and burn incense around the bed of the sleeping enemy. Poor Emily was ordered to carry out the plan under pain of death. The girl remembered the gentleman's kindness and warm attitude towards her. The owner and the maid tried to come up with a nickname for their pet, but nothing came to mind except for Zolochi, considering the orange color of the animal. Bob burst into his partner's house unexpectedly, telling him that Kate had surrendered to justice and confessed to the attempted murder of the third gentleman. The young men hurried to the dungeon together. The leader of the thug squad sat in a cell, chained to the stone walls with shackles and handcuffs. John tried to question the proud girl, but she remained silent. Taking advantage of his position, the third disciple of the Lord ordered the servant to release the commander since he denied her attack on him. As he was leaving, the main character invited Kate to come visit him. At home, the partners discussed the motives of the girl's actions. John explained to his friend that this was the only way to divert suspicion from the entire squad and not suspect her of joining the camp of Ray's enemies. If Boar's boss had admitted to taking a bribe from the fourth gentleman, the entire gang of militants would have been arrested. The head of the judge's guard was surprised by the common sense and prudence of his friend. He was very different from the man Bob knew before the coma. Now the gentleman was wiser, as if he had lived 100 years. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. Kate came by to thank John with delicious food prepared by her personally. The commander told about Ray's secret knowledge and advised him to be careful and not trust anyone. The fourth student asked the servant how things were with the magic wands. News from Emily had not arrived for 2 days. The doctor realized that the girl did not go against her master and launched a secret bug into her body for destruction. The conversation between like-minded people in the main character's house lasted a long time. Bob still did not believe the girl and stood behind the gentleman, ready to defend him. Evening came. It was time for evening training. John invited his friends to stay the night. Kate looked at the unknown technology. She did not understand why the main character was revealing his secrets. Bob spent more than 1 month with the master and knew his reasoning. He explained to the girl that, according to the third disciple of the master, people should trust and help each other. The head of the gang had never heard such a theory. She did not know what good was. Tired and hungry, the friends went to look for the maid whom they had not seen all day. Emily lay on the floor in her room, moaning in pain. John examined the poor thing. She could hardly tell him about the order of the fourth master. The main character identified an internal enemy in the girl, which, like a deathworm, kills organs. It was urgent to save the maid, and John carried her to his place. The Supreme Overlord called the chief guard. He was interested in the third disciple, but Jackson did not tell anything new. Sullivan was the only one who knew the secret of the bamboo forest and could not understand what happened there and how the young man survived. The main one in the grove was a merciless, cruel jackal who was supposed to capture the soul of the third contender. The animal had a constant cycle of life and death. When an adult died, a small cub appeared, and so on endlessly. It was this animal that was the most formidable master of the forest, which took moisture and energy from all living things, including plants and monsters. The birth of the baby meant the beginning of new wars and conflicts. This little fluffy fox with huge ears and naive eyes was the most terrible demon of all worlds. John remembered all the healing methods of his past life, which had helped him repeatedly heal wounds and get rid of an internal parasite at one time. The little maid's condition was grave. The main character continued the healing rituals of magic. Finally, Emily coughed and spat out the deadly insect along with the blood. It was a corrosion beetle that gnawed out the insides, and the person died in agony and pain. John knew who had once again tried to kill him, and the poor maid who had refused to carry out the deadly order, sacrificing her life. At this time, Kate found incense sticks in Emily's room. The girl knew what their use could lead to. Ray repeatedly spoke about his experiments and experiences. The whole box should have disabled and killed the third gentleman completely. The commander increasingly thought that she liked John and was worried about him. Ray realized that the poisoning option had not worked again and was preparing the next one. The healer suggested changing tactics, worried that his master would not have enough skills to defeat the opponent, who had turned out to be stronger. A noise outside the door made both villains turn around. The gates were blown away by a powerful blast wave and the dust cleared. The formidable third disciple stood, his eyes flashing like lightning. John demanded an explanation for all the assassination attempts. Ray denied his involvement in all the troubles of his competitor. In a rage, the protagonist hit his opponent in the face. The fourth decided that the time had come to finally deal with the hated enemy, calling upon his main magical power, a giant poisonous snake. The battle between the two contenders for the throne of the Demon Lord has begun. Ray was fast, but he was losing strength, which John took advantage of. Magical energy flashed. The battle was fierce. Everyone was thirsty for revenge. The main character suddenly missed a blow with his hand and felt a sharp pain in his side. Ray used a clever trick and released claws with poison. The injury did not stop John. He was ready to take revenge for his coma, for the suffering of little Emily. Ray saw his enemy transforming right before his eyes and was frightened. The fourth student was faced with a menacing rock of a competitor, burning with a thirst for murder. It is difficult to say how long the fight would have continued. Everyone was determined to win, but a menacing shout stopped both opponents. A dark cloud appeared in the sky. The black guards of the Palace of Justice flew to stop the bloodshed. The law enforcers were required to take both participants in the battle into custody and escort them to the courtroom. John managed to run to the doctor and took out the deadly beetle. Ray realized that he was finally losing his faithful servant. The insect instantly entered the head through the ear canal. The death of the fourth master's treacherous assistant came instantly. The Palace of Justice resembled a battlefield that night. The interrogations of both opponents lasted for several hours. Finally, the law enforcement officer invited John to the reconciliation room. The protagonist felt a wave of anger emanating from him and saw the shadows of two people. An elderly stranger and Ray were already in the hall. The unknown person introduced himself as the head of the Palace of Justice. John asked the owner to remove the mask that members of this squad usually wore. The request surprised Ted. No one had ever felt his double appearance or seen his second face before. He was amazed by John's ability. The head of law and order ordered the warring parties to observe a truce. In the Empire, two departments were responsible for maintaining order and judicial proceedings. Bob belonged to the first and was one of the heads of the judge's guards. Ted led the Black Guards of Justice, who always had to wear masks. Ray refused to listen to the demands, as he considered himself higher in status and went home. The conversation of those who remained was short, but John managed to try the drink prepared by the owner of the palace himself. The taste was very pleasant. Ted shared the bottle with the guest. The men said goodbye, and the head of justice again felt something familiar in the departing third heir. Evening fell on the town, the weather was wonderful, and there was silence all around. Ray walked home and remembered the outrageous instructions from the owner of the law enforcement hall. The sound of a broken branch made the villain flinch in fear. At the root of a huge tree sat his enemy and smiled. John offered to drink a noble drink and just chat, something they hadn't done since their distant childhood. The opponents sat down opposite each other. The main character was interested in Ray's future plans. The fourth gentleman wanted power and was ready to go to it over corpses. He could not imagine life without the throne. The younger one promised that he would continue the fight with the third one until complete victory. John suggested continuing the duel without witnesses. It was a good idea, and Ray decided to deal with his competitor without witnesses. The rivals were ready for battle again. For further safety, John needed to defeat and destroy Ray. The Blackguard reported to the owner that both gentlemen continued their skirmish without leaving the judge's garden. The magical transformation into a monster with snakeskin and long, poisonous claws took place instantly. Ray had prepared several insidious surprises for his enemy and was looking forward to victory. The opponents clashed in mortal combat. A wall of fiery light threw the snake back several meters. Ray fell, but quickly returned to action, and the battle continued. John managed to maintain his advantage in the fight, but the fourth challenger turned out to be a strong fighter. The rivals' blocks for power drove the villain crazy. Ray swung to hit the enemy, but John instantly moved to another place, a skill the fourth had never seen in his opponent before. The main character stood a few meters away and prepared to strike. In an instant, the young man was nearby. A powerful surge of internal energy struck Ray right in the vital center. A strong blow knocked the enemy to the ground. Rage overwhelmed the fourth disciple, and the snake finally broke free. Poisonous streams of lava flew in all directions. Ray was transforming, and with each passing second he was turning more and more into a demon with a snake tongue. A thick fog began to descend from the sky, enveloping everything around. The dark, thick cloud was approaching the main character. The fourth student warned John that the damage from the long claws he had received earlier would, when exposed to the mist, attract poisonous substances, killing everything inside the body. The protagonist felt that it was becoming more difficult to breathe. The wounds were really starting to bother him more. It was time to get out of the ambush. The fire ring technique helped the protagonist destroy the deadly cloud. Suddenly, John heard a familiar voice and looked around. Emily crawled across the grass, sobbing and begging for help. The main character rushed to his maid and tried to lift her up. The girl's eyes sparkled with a magical light. It was an optical illusion. Then the baby turned into a stream of light. The young man did not understand what was happening to him. The demon queen walked towards John and threatened to kill him. The main character saw his bloody hands and stumps of legs lying nearby on the grass and heard the voice of the elder. Ray watched his opponent's hallucinations with pleasure and gathered his strength for the next throw. Long clawed fingers reached out from the fog. It seemed they would soon pierce the protagonist's neck. Suddenly, the fog disappeared and the protagonist's hand tightly squeezed the snake demon's throat, preventing him from breathing. Ray didn't understand how his enemy was able to get out of the magical smoke ring so quickly. The competitors stood opposite each other and prepared for a new fight. John decided to finally defeat the fourth, calling on the energy of a merciless blow for this. The Snake Master also tried to gather his power. Both opponents went on the attack. Flashes of light were visible for several kilometers. The protagonist used acceleration and triple strike magic, instantly moving close to the enemy. The goal was achieved. Ray was seriously wounded. John failed to deliver a fatal blow. An unexpected stream of light held the weapon. The main character could not move the sword. The head of the Palace of Justice arrived in time and prevented the murder. The main character easily dealt with the block and quickly headed towards the owner of the masked guards. Ted tensed and prepared to defend himself. John flew like an arrow at the defender of law and order. The magic shield worked instantly. The main character stopped for only a few seconds. The law enforcement officer stood behind a solid wall of energy and did not see the enemy. Ted relaxed his guard and looked around. The third gentleman was not nearby. The head of justice realized that he had been deceived and that the attack was not intended for him, but for the fourth disciple of the ruler. Ray couldn't move. Blood was flowing like a river from a large wound. The Chief Justice tried again to stop John. The protagonist decided that killing his merciless enemy would be an easy punishment for him. A harsher punishment was needed. The third student carried out a blockade of the competitor's energy, after which the person lies in a coma, as Ray once did with him. Only a few can return from such a state. The fourth gentleman was no longer a danger to the protagonist. Revenge had been taken. Ray lay helplessly on the grass. The head of the courtroom called for a squad to escort the detained third gentleman. The black guards of justice arrived immediately. The protagonist raised his hands, showing that he would not resist, and surrendered. Ted visited the Lord's third apprentice in the cell where he was chained. John easily tore the super titanium metal, showing the owner of the law enforcement hall that the handcuffs were a tribute to respect and not an admission of guilt, which he did not feel, since he himself was repeatedly subjected to attempts on life and health by Ray. The protagonist considered his detention illegal, since there was no statement from the accused, and said goodbye to Ted. John hurried home. The head of the palace warned him at the end that he would be under constant surveillance and control of law and order. Once again, a distant familiar smell enveloped the guard who remained in the dungeon. He could not remember where these sensations came from. Ted thought about it, but to no avail. Something was blocking his thoughts from the past. The friends met the main character and all together went to celebrate the victory at Bob's place. John talked about the battle with Ray while devouring plate after plate of delicious home-cooked food. The main character thanked his like-minded people for their support and help. The third gentleman thanked his bodyguard and partner for the few months they had spent together in the bamboo forest, which had taught them both a lot. But Bob had duties at work, so John reminded him that he had to get back to work. Kate also received words of gratitude, but she also had to return to the squad, which was already waiting for its commander. The friends sadly realized that John was right, but they did not want to part. The head of the guards felt empty, as if this was their last meeting. The main character said goodbye and hurried home. He really missed his little friends. Emily did not expect the gentleman to return quickly. She was informed that he was detained, and she was very upset. The girl threw herself at John's feet with joy. The fox cub spun around nearby, waving his fluffy tail. The Supreme Demon Lord walked through a flowering meadow and asked the chief guard about the duel of his disciples. He was surprised by the third one's decision to spare the life of his competitor instead of killing him. Sullivan recalled little Ray, who was a very smart child, but did not like to study, so he mastered only one magical teaching, without perfecting combat techniques. When the fourth student grew up, he did not continue to study new knowledge. but only perfected the art of poisons. The master understood that in order to come out of a coma, special powers and techniques were needed, which the student, unlike John, did not possess, so his return to duty was practically impossible. One fine day, the main character was visited by a guest. Patricia came to tell about the successes of her ward and asked John to personally examine the girl and work on her complete recovery. As a deal, the Master of Education promised to fulfill any request the master made. The young man tried to refuse, but the lady was persistent. They needed to decide on the date of the trip. John did not know how to realize his only dream of freedom, and having heard that a convoy was expected to travel abroad for rare goods in the next month, he agreed to help. He already knew that Patricia was responsible for forming the detachment. Bob was engaged in self-improvement. After the last assignment from the authorities, he matured significantly, acquired new skills and knowledge. The head of the guards recalled the meeting with the gentleman and could not calm down. He became very attached to the young man and could not understand where the young man got so much wisdom and experience, noting to himself once again that before the coma, he was a completely different person, greedy and not very kind. The security guard was distracted from his sad thoughts by a colleague who said that the chief judicial guard was looking for him. The young man went to the commander. It was time to begin a new mission. The order surprised the seasoned fighter. It was necessary to create additional protection for the convoy using the judge's guards, in addition to the usual security detachment that was on every trip. Patricia's house welcomed the main character hospitably. John and his hostess entered a bright, spacious room in which a beauty lay on the bed. It was Elizabeth, the master's ward. Despite her very young age, the girl was a member of the Enlightenment caste and led a large number of directions there. A sudden unknown block put her to bed for several months. No doctors could cope with her condition. The recommendations given a few weeks ago by the young men were able to return consciousness. The lady was able to get up and master some techniques. John carefully studied the internal energy of the young lady. The blood was mixed with poison. Patricia saw the streams of pure energy emanating from her guest and believed in success. The third gentleman tried to remove harmful substances from the girl's body, which had been in her for several months and were killing her life force. Blood started coming from her nose, which was a good sign. The poison was leaving the beauty's body. Several days of training produced positive results. The girl was conscious. She could speak, and active training quickly strengthened her muscles. Elizabeth was getting better every day. She had not lost her memory and previous skills and was already ready to start her duties. John announced his price. He asked to secretly include him in the convoy leaving the state borders. The Master of Enlightenment was angry. It was impossible to do this. The young man convinced her that everything was possible. The deal had to take place, since he had completed his task of saving the girl under his charge. Patricia understood that it was practically impossible to put a person in the convoy without the knowledge of the authorities and security. John insisted on his request. The master, after thinking, agreed and asked for time to prepare for the difficult task. After saying goodbye, John got ready to go home to prepare for a long trip. Before leaving, the main character went to see the girl. Elizabeth was surprised by the arrival of a barely familiar young man. She looked magnificent. The third gentleman introduced himself and said that the beauty owed her salvation to his efforts and knowledge. She thanked the young man. The energy that emanated from the master's ward was similar to that of the main character. He felt her power and knew what she needed. John sent the girl to training. It was necessary to immediately recover after a long rest. Patricia was very worried whether Elizabeth would be able to cope with the heavy load. The mistress of the house tried to protect the girl from worries, but the character of her ward was stronger than steel. The beauty felt well and insisted on being allowed to work and accompany the convoy, which was supposed to leave in 10 days. It was impossible to stop her. Time flew by quickly, and the large detachment set off on a long journey. In the carriage, together with the representative of Enlightenment, there was a modest young man in a large straw hat hiding his face. The road was not short, but John had 2 secluded places abroad where everything was prepared for a long stay, where he wanted to go to earn money and become free. Elizabeth was surprised to learn that the third gentleman was traveling with her, but her patroness insisted on it. John tried not to get out of the cart. The border was still very far away. Suddenly, the carriage slowed down and new voices were heard. The protagonist tensed up. The familiar smell of energy swirled somewhere nearby. The convoy approached the city gates and stopped briefly. The young man heard the voice of his partner greeting the column's guards and giving instructions to his guards. John didn't expect to meet anyone he knew, much less an old friend, which completely ruined his plans. The main character was in shock. He didn't know what to do. Elizabeth could not understand what had happened and why her companion had changed so much. It was not difficult for John to put the still weakened, road-tired girl to sleep. Bob was passing a closed wagon when he heard a quiet voice calling him. He knew exactly who it belonged to, and he couldn't believe his ears. The gentleman greeted his friend and asked him to speak in a confidential tone. The head of the guards was surprised by the meeting no less than his partner, who asked not to tell anyone about his presence. The convoy set off. The city roads ended, and further ahead lay forest thickets, mountain serpentines, and passes. In a large cave, the former commander of the Demons of Steel Blood, Thompson, set up his hiding place, having decided to separate from the fortress and earn money by robbery himself. His squad was small in number, and the deputy offered to take a gang of beast monsters into partnership. The ruthless killer knew that there would soon be a holiday in the neighboring empire and planned to rob a convoy purchasing goods for the big celebration. Additional forces were needed, but the sight of a pack of demons in wolf skins eating everything in their path irritated the commander. A column of wagons was due to pass nearby in a few days, and Thompson was considering a plan of attack. Elizabeth slept for 2 days. When she opened her eyes, the third gentleman was sitting as usual. The girl was scared. She didn't expect that John would treat her like that. The beauty indignantly expressed her complaints, and the main character calmed her down. The savior referred to a weakened body and the need for rest for full recovery. The young man offered Elizabeth a snack, treating her to his modest supplies. The carriage moved slowly. It was time for lunch. The red-haired friend, sensing the tasty supply, crawled out from under the seat. The girl was surprised. It was the first time she saw a fox as a pet. The baby looked closely at the stranger and continued gnawing on the meat. The column stopped for a short rest. The partners met and moved away from people, switching to a safe language that they had mastered in the dangerous forest. John didn't understand why a regular trading convoy needed the additional protection of elite guards when there was a security detachment that constantly accompanied all trips. Bob handed over to the gentleman a secret document that he had received from the commander, along with the order to go on a mission. As the protagonist studied the important paper, he began to shake more and more. It said that one of the malicious criminals and the elder of the Heavenly Alliance of Demons and Murderers was planning to seize a peaceful convoy. The mere mention of this monster made John remember and relive his terrible past. The young man could not believe that he would ever again be able to meet his sworn enemy. It was William, the very same head of the Martial Arts Fortress Alliance and the ruler of the Steel Blood Squads, who killed all the masters, made John a ruthless killer, to whom he gave 30 years of service and from whom he tried to escape on that fateful night. The protagonist forever remembered their last conversation. The thirst for revenge was stronger than the dream of freedom. The young gentleman warned his partner that the chief of the mercenaries was cunning and ruthless. The convoy set off, and there was silence in the wagon. John couldn't calm down from the surging memories. Elizabeth did not understand what had happened to her fellow traveler. He was very gloomy. He was simply shaking all over. The main character tried to calm down, but the last night of his previous life was still before his eyes. The fox cub, sitting in the girl's arms, sensed the state of his owner and clung to him. At this time, a guest entered the distant house of the third gentleman. Kate asked the maid why she hadn't seen her friend anywhere for several days. Emily was also upset by his absence. John told her that he was leaving for training. The main character's sword, which stood in its usual place, made the squad leader worry, not understanding what was happening. The girl became agitated. At the next halt, while waiting for the stragglers, Bob warned the senior convoy leader about the possibility of an attack. Suddenly, screams were heard in the distance, causing both security commanders to flinch. The fighters of the main detachment ran with cries of horror, supporting their wounded colleagues. The head of the judge's guards rushed forward, trying to understand what had happened. One of the victims said that the rest of the convoy with goods, loading the purchases, was attacked. The main killer was very strong and agile. Only a few guards managed to escape. All the purchased goods were taken away. The protagonist, who heard the entire conversation, jumped out of the carriage in a rage. Only the walls remained from the transit base, which served as a permanent resting place for the convoy on its long journey. The bodies of the dead lay everywhere. Thompson stood and examined the trophies. There were surprisingly few of them. They were manuscripts and some herbs. The surprise and tactical move helped defeat the guards, who were peacefully preparing for the return journey. Because the main part of the convoy had already left the house, The commander of the Steel Blood did not even resort to the help of new shaggy assistants, spinning around and thirsty for meat. The only surviving guard groaned as he bled. The head of the murderers easily dealt with the dying man, who was not helped by any magical powers of his supreme lord. The beast-like giant boys commanding his fanged army reminded Thompson of the need to feed the pack. The commander did not like his insolent tone and the look of the toothy assistants that had to be hired for support. The monstrous animals were hungry and thirsty for blood, and the bodies of the dead served as easy prey and food for them. The survivors returned to the base to assess the damage and bury the defenders. They knew that the mercenaries would not stay there for long and would go to the prepared secret caves. Elizabeth, as the head of the wagon train, sent word of what had happened, and a decision had to be made on what to do next. The representative of education suggested that the guards find the goods and punish the thieves and murderers. The main character asked his friend to give him a weapon. John told Bob where the enemies might be hiding and advised him to be very careful. A second later, the gentleman was reduced to clouds of dust. The magic of rapid transfer carried him to meet his old offender. In the rapid flight, the young man thought over a plan for revenge. The red animal, like a faithful talisman, was with its owner. While the wolf pack was finishing off the bloody corpses, a guest arrived at Thompson's camp. Elder George greeted the familiar commander of the fortress, who had carried out his orders for many years. The leader of the Steel Blood assassins told the chief about a squad of new partners in animal skins, which he clearly did not like. The Lord of the Assassin Alliance greeted Boys and his fearsome gang. George reminded his junior that he needed to be considerate and kind to those on his side, so that the situation did not change in the other direction, and friends did not turn out to be enemies. The pack of beasts sent to help the Alliance from the fortress of the Cloud Forest was practically invincible. Their skin was especially durable, and their fangs and claws were sharper than any blade. The elder turned to Thompson. The main target of the attack was a small thing that was to be taken from the killer's convoy. The commander of Steel Blood carefully took a package out of his inner pocket. The price of a small bag was dozens of innocent guards doing their job. Having unwrapped the package, the elder gazed at the shining blue ball. It was a magical elixir with enormous energy potential, with the help of which the villain dreamed of seizing power from other states. The head of the Heavenly Alliance said goodbye to Thompson, who had been aiming for the position of the elder for several years and had long since separated from the other representatives of the fortress. The mission was completed. The rival who sowed discord and had a strong team of killers was no longer needed by the elder. The knife entered through the back straight into the heart of the mercenary. Seeing the lifeless body of their commander, the soldiers were at a loss. As it turned out, George had known Boys for a long time. They understood each other at one glance, and silent approval was received. The mercenaries were defenseless against a pack of beast monsters. It was impossible to escape from them. The small village in the middle of the forest was filled with guards of the Fortress of Darkness. The Alliance leader's security detail was waiting for their boss, relaxing in the sun. The elder left for a few days, telling everyone that he was going to visit his mother's grave. This was the official version of his presence near the borders of the neighboring empire. It was quiet and calm all around. The fighters were training and resting. Suddenly, a roar was heard behind the houses. The trees in the forest thicket swayed as if during a strong storm, although there was no wind outside. The source of the sounds was John, flying like an arrow to the outskirts of the village. The attack was so unexpected that no one had time to grab a weapon. Not seeing the one he was looking for, the protagonist tried to find out where the elder had disappeared to. The version about visiting the grave sounded implausible, but the guards were not aware of their master's plans. Upset, John took off again to search for the enemy, who must have been somewhere nearby since he left alone. George and the Beast Lord stood on the edge of the cliff. The leaders watched as the pack instantly dealt with Thomas's squad, which had become an unnecessary burden for everyone. Boys praised his shaggy fighters. The elder understood that it was better to have such dangerous warriors on his side. He was already making plans to use them. In the dreams of the head of the Heavenly Alliance, there was a throne of the Supreme Lord of Demons. One of the monsters announced the approach of an enemy. In the distance, a small detachment of the divine cult appeared. The defenders of the convoy followed the bloody tracks of the criminals. The leader gave the command to the pack to deal with the strangers. The guards of the convoy, together with the guards of the judges, moved cautiously among the rocks and trees, expecting an attack at any moment. When Bob and Elizabeth saw the enemy, they were at a loss. From above, hundreds of sparkling eyes looked down on the group of fighters from the cliffs. The animals quickly rushed to attack. The head of the guards tried unsuccessfully to defend himself, but his strong steel sword could not pierce the powerful skin of the monsters. Elizabeth used magical ice lightning balls. The result was very insignificant. The number of beasts increased. The number of guards was rapidly decreasing. Bob changed his battle tactics, but the forces were unequal. The girl tirelessly threw chilling sparks at the approaching monsters. The freeze stopped the wolves, but the energy expended required restoration. The friends realized that they had to retreat in order to save the remnants of the detachment. The enemy was stronger and significantly outnumbered the guards. Bob gave the command to use a rotation technique that could trap the animals and create an impenetrable wall. The unusual method of defense forced the animals to stop, which gave them time to gather their strength. The elder watched the battle from above, realizing that it was useless to fight and that the enemy had no chance. The main character heard the sounds of a distant battle and rushed to help. The beast monsters have gone on the offensive again. Elizabeth tried in every way to fight off the huge fangs flashing before her eyes. The girl had less and less energy left for magic. Gathering all his remaining power, Bob used the blast wave technique, which allowed him to reduce the enemy's onslaught. The surge of the expended force field practically knocked the head of the judge's guards out of the ranks of the fighters. He couldn't even get to his feet. Elizabeth gave the order to the survivors to immediately retreat to shelter. The animals came very close. There was no longer any chance to escape from them. The leader of the alliance and the leader of the pack watched from above as the ranks of the defenders melted away. Having decided to show the full power of the Shaggy Kingdom and finally defeat the enemy troops, boys rushed into the crowd of fighters. Bob, who stood in the monster's path, was blown away by a stream of brutal energy and fell. The girl tried to protect her assistant. Balls of ice storm flew at the enemy one after another. The leader of the predators easily parried the blows. A huge fist fell on the fragile representative of enlightenment. She only managed to group herself a little, which saved her from a broken spine. Boys held poor Elizabeth by her shock of hair. The girl could not move. The animals came closer, sensing easy prey. One of the convoy guards ordered the thug to let the lady go. In an instant, the defender's head disappeared into the monster's toothy mouth. The head of the guards, barely able to rise after the attack of the wolf chieftain, gathered his last strength and struck the offender with a magical beam from his sword. The leader of the pack slammed Bob into the rocks with a powerful blow. Elizabeth watched in horror as her protector died. The head of the referee's security did not move. Boys gave a sign to his four-legged fighters. The fanged monsters were preparing for the final battle. The entire pack of animals from the surrounding forests gathered at the call, preparing for the feast. The wolves surrounded the small group of guards from all sides. There was nowhere to retreat. The elder watched the last minutes of the squad's life without any regret. The unequal battle began again. The strength and number of shaggy monsters exceeded the enemy by thousands of times. Bob tried to get up again. Elizabeth fought off the beast's attacks along with the guards. Looking back, the girl managed to notice a large shadow of a monster behind her, preparing to pounce. There was only one moment left. The flying sword saved the head of the convoy from certain death. The wolf lay without breathing, his blood flowing like a stream. John made it just in time. A few more minutes and only a few bones would have remained of the squad. The main character's weapon worked tirelessly. Magic beams struck monsters from a distance. The animals could not defend themselves from the power of the energy. Their skin was torn into small pieces. The third gentleman, who came to deal with one monster in human form, encountered a whole pack, and it was necessary to save the fighters. The young man challenged the leader to a duel, Boyce's eyes burning with hatred. Taking advantage of the respite, Elizabeth and the remaining guards helped the wounded and restored energy. From the height of the cliff, the elder looked in bewilderment at the young man who had stopped the monsters and was preparing to fight the leader of the beast lair, not understanding how this could have happened and who this hero was. John glanced up and a wave of hatred washed over George. The old man suddenly smelled blood. While the unequal battle was going on, the Master of Education received a distinguished guest at her home. The first person of the Empire, General of Strategy Franklin, visited his subordinate. Patricia was surprised by the unexpected visit and a little frightened, not understanding what she owed to such a famous person who was always extremely busy. The chief strategist did not drag out the conversation and immediately asked about the third gentleman. The master reminded that the Enlightenment had never participated in political games or supporting pretenders to the throne. Franklin made it clear that he knew about the secret departure of the master's disciple with a convoy abroad. The general was trying to find out what kind of person he was, a candidate for a high post, about whom there had been a lot of talk lately, and whose name constantly appeared in various showdowns. The young lady suggested that he meet the gentleman himself and form his own opinion. Unaware of what high-ranking people of the state were saying about him, John prepared for the final battle. One of the beast monsters was quietly sneaking up behind the main character, preparing to attack. Boys gave the command to the pack to prepare for attack. Suddenly, a small fox with huge golden eyes crawled out of the young man's clothes. The animal jumped to the ground from the protagonist's hands. The baby sat behind his owner, as if covering his back from the sneaking wolf. The monster was already very close and was preparing for a deadly throw. The red fox's gaze hypnotized the shaggy giant. Suddenly, the cute little fluffy lump turned into a scary, toothy predator. The wolf trembled with fear, and a wave of piercing howls echoed through the mountains. Those around could not listen to this strange sound. The beast leader lost his hearing as if he was paralyzed for some time. There was silence. The fox calmly looked at his shaggy comrade, who could not move. The baby sat on the wolf's back. The attack failed. Boys tried to get back into shape, but his arms and legs wouldn't obey him. John thanked his four-legged friend for his help, making sure that he knew nothing about his pet. The animals scattered, and boys had nowhere to expect support from. The battle between two hostile worlds has begun. The advantage was clearly on the side of the protagonist. The leader of the pack could not understand where this unknown young man came from, who so deftly handled the energy flows and masterfully wielded the sword. It was necessary to end the brutal battle. John gathered all the magic of the heavenly gate and swung his blade. The head of the beast chieftain, with wide-open eyes, rolled across the stones. The elder, who was watching the battle, regretted the loss of his shaggy allies and decided that it was time to leave the rock and return to his squad. The young man sensed the enemy's plan. It was time to take revenge on his former master. With one jump, the main character overcame the height and found himself next to George. It was necessary to immediately neutralize the enemy. The old man was an experienced fighter and repelled the attack of the unknown youth. The forces on both sides were approximately equal. The leader of the alliance used his favorite magic move. John fought off the swirling currents of the Moonhammer. All the magical teachings and skills acquired in the bamboo forest, combined with John's honed martial arts techniques, came in handy to defeat the old enemy who deprived the protagonist of his friends and life. The old man could not understand where the stranger knew the ancient secret techniques from, and why he wanted him dead. The brightly burning feeling of hatred in the protagonist's gaze spoke of his firm decision to kill. George couldn't believe that some boy could defeat him, the most powerful and insidious demon in the entire alliance. The young man was resistant to all the attacks of the elder. He called upon all the power of heaven and earth. So great was his predecessor's feeling of hatred and thirst for revenge for long years of service and the unfulfilled dream of freedom. The main character's powerful energy flows prevented the old man from moving and weakened his arms. John jumped high and delivered a decisive blow to his opponent. The sword passed straight through the enemy's entire body, cutting him into two halves. At the last second, the protagonist realized that he had thoughtlessly used up too much potential and fell unconscious. The detachment's losses were great. The remaining fighters collected the stolen items and prepared for the return journey. Both main representatives of the authorities suffered greatly in unequal battles with criminals, but were alive. Bob gave the girl a recovery capsule, which the judge's guards received before the mission, although he himself was no less in need of treatment. Elizabeth thanked the brave warrior for everything. The quietly yapping red-haired baby attracted the attention of the conversation. The fox seemed to be calling him somewhere, and Bob hurried after him. Finally, the animal stopped, and the head of the judge's security saw an unexpected picture. The gentleman was lying unconscious on the ground, and next to him was the body of the elder of the Heavenly Alliance of Demons and Assassins, cut into two parts. The nightmare trip was over, but not everyone returned home. Patricia tried to console her charge, convincing her that she was doing the right thing. Bob reported to the commander of the judge's guard detachments about the unfulfilled task of guarding the convoy. The manager understood that the head of security was not at fault, but he had to punish him for the loss of his colleagues. The young man was temporarily removed from the ranks of the guard and sent as a bodyguard to the third master for an indefinite period. There was silence in the main character's house. John opened his eyes and was taken aback by the surprise. He was lying on the bed again. Like a few months ago, a happy fox was jumping next to him. The dream of freedom had collapsed again. When his partner found his friend lying exhausted, he ordered him to be carried to a cart and brought home, where it took several days for him to recover. The upset young man went out into the yard. Bob was walking towards the main character and told him about his punishment and the commander's order. The young gentleman was shocked. It was necessary to settle a new resident in the house nearby. The escape was postponed again. Emily prepared breakfast, and the friends sat down at the table. Bob was cheerful and thanked the maid for the delicious food. John did not touch the food. He was silent and thoughtful. The young man understood that his thirst for revenge had pushed his dream aside, and he tried to analyze the situation with the loss of energy, which could change the outcome of the battle. A smiling Kate dropped by to visit her friends, bringing some more food with her. There was a knock at the gate, and the young people became wary. They were not expecting anyone else. An unknown man was walking across the yard. John asked the guest to introduce himself, and was surprised to learn that he was dealing with a very famous person. Before the arrival of the high-ranking person, the main character asked Bob where he got the sword from, which he gave him after the forest exile. His partner told him about the weapons storage, which can only be accessed once, and not by everyone. The general, who turned out to be the stranger, heard the information about the warehouse. He promised the owner of the house to take advantage of his status and take him there. At the strategist's request, the protagonist and he were left alone. Franklin told him that he knew about the third gentleman leaving the Empire. John did not hide this fact. The purpose of the visit was not clear to him. On the way to the armory, the protagonist felt an aura of lies emanating from the general and took out his sword. John was confident and was ready to kill the high official if he did not tell the truth. The uninvited guest caught the steadfastness in the young man's words and gaze and realized that he was not joking. Death was very close. The general confessed that he personally wanted to meet the main candidate for the throne, who was supported by the ruler, in order to develop further tactics of behavior and solutions to state problems. The protagonist realized that the offer to visit the armory was just a pretext to get him out of the house without the support of his friends, and he went back, upset. Franklin himself was surprised by his kindness, and the trip to the warehouse of heavenly rays continued. The huge room was filled with all kinds of weapons. It was a special place that not all members of society were allowed to visit. Even the heirs could come here no more than once. The strategist waited outside and was taken aback when he saw John emerge from the gate with several swords, explaining that there was no discussion about the number of units, and since this might be the only trip to the secret room, he had stocked up for the future. The young man was right. We had to agree with his arguments and allow him to take all the chosen items. Bob met the gentleman in the courtyard. He was frightened by the visit of the distinguished guest. Seeing the choice of the owner, the bodyguard was shocked. Each sword had its own ancient history and meaning. These were some of the best blades in the warehouse. The young man did not forget about his partner and brought a heavy sword with a wide blade as a gift. His friend was overjoyed. It was a weapon with hidden devilish energy that could only be activated by its true owner. A knock at the gate again frightened the partners, informing the owner of the House of the Order of the Ruler to come to the main temple. The high priest was surprisingly kind and talkative. The teacher was pleased with the successes and victories of his best student, and as a gift presented him with a lesson and manuscripts on improving the magical teachings that John studied in the bamboo grove. It was a priceless treasure. The first guard of the Empire unexpectedly asked the general to accept him for the first time. They talked about the third student. The strategist confirmed the opinion of the Master of Education that this is an extraordinary person who is worthy of respect and attention. After talking with the ruler, the main character was visited by the head of the Palace of Justice. His request was that it was necessary to help find and detain the killer. Everything was complicated by the fact that this was a representative of a very high rank whom the judicial authorities could not dispose of. John was not happy to talk to Ted, remembering past disagreements, but promised to help and went to Patricia for information. The main festival of the year was coming up, which needed to be used for support from numerous residents and guests of the holiday. The Master of Enlightenment collected data on all the invited guests and passed it on to the protagonist. The streets of the capital were beautifully decorated with bright lanterns. Crowds of guests walked along the streets. John and his friends also came to the celebration. Having waited until the detachment of the clan of Sharp Blades arrived at the central square, the third gentleman came out to greet the head of the large family. Alan was unhappy with the stop and loudly complained. John asked to answer one question in the presence of the crowd. Upon learning that the man in front of him was the master's disciple, the father of the family greeted the young man, reluctantly answering his tricky question about duty to the empire and protecting law and order regardless of the circumstances. even if the criminal was his child. Alan's two sons walked behind their ancestor, casting hateful glances in John's direction. The elder one exuded the spirit of dozens of deaths. The younger one was enveloped in powerful demonic energy, and the ruler was supposed to choose one of them as his next student at the festival. In the evening, Bob and his friend were returning from the pub when they were stopped by an unknown person. The demon was determined and demanded the magic sword of the protagonist's bodyguard. The stranger was skilled with his hands, and he didn't need any extra effort to knock out his friends, who weren't expecting an attack at all. John's appearance saved the squad leader and the guard from senseless bloodshed. The guy's demonic power was enormous. Only with the help of magical knowledge was it possible to cope with it and detain the criminal, who confessed to the murders of many innocent people in the district. It was the youngest son of the head of the Order of Sharp Blades, but the performer of the demonic rites of execution was the elder brother, who had yet to be detained. The owner of the Hall of Justice thanked the protagonist for his help. Despite the late hour, the third gentleman went to the father of the family and provided a list of his children's victims. The conversation was difficult. The man could not believe what was said, accusing the young man of fighting against competitors. The main day of the festival arrived, when anyone who came with a request or problem could count on the support of the ruler. The tent with the Supreme Lord was carried through the central streets of the capital. Sullivan greeted his subjects. Residents and guests of the holiday greeted their patron. Alan, who had not slept all night, listened to the order of the ruler about including his eldest son in the team of his students and made a speech. The leader of the divine cult of demons invited the head of the clan to the temple and called the third disciple to him. After listening to the story and repentance of the father, he promised to punish the young man, who no longer belonged to the family. Alan left the sanctuary, and the all-knowing Sullivan tried to understand the student, why he suggested to the grief-stricken father, who defended his children to the last, a worthy way out to preserve the honor of the order. The Supreme Demon Lord looked at his disciple, whose thoughts and actions he could not fully foresee, wondering what was going on in the boy's head, what the fox had to do with all the events, and what changes were coming in the near future. The main character did not take his eyes off the teacher, not knowing how he would deal with Alan's sons, what awaited him in the future, whether he would be able to fulfill his cherished dream and become free, or whether the throne of power was destined for him.